welcome to another episode of Intuitive Creators Spotlight. If you're new to this channel, please take a moment to subscribe to the channel and ring the notification bell because you will get notified every time amazing interviews and videos are posted here. Today, I have a beautiful guest, Laura. She is a passionate advocate for healing and personal growth. She has been navigating through life complexities, and in that journey, she discovered beautiful techniques, and she discovered how she can serve the world and those people who are going through especially grief. Welcome, Laura. It's so great to have you here today.
Thank you, Stella. Thank you for inviting me. It's an honor to be here with you today.
I'm so happy you're here. I know that you've been through a lot, Laura, and what I would love for you to share with us here at the beginning of this interview is maybe a key moment or an experience that really sparked your path to personal growth and self-discovery.
Thank you, Stella. Yes, I will. There is a key moment. And one of the things I always say to people is that you don't get to the tender age of 55 without having been around the block a bit in the nicest possible way. And I've had, a lot of sort of like personal sort of situations, as like many people have, but I've had also a lot of professional experiences as well. My background is, my early background is primary school education. And I was a wellbeing sort of teacher in primary schools, but I also had my own personal sort of problems as well. So I'd had sort of like 10 years of like chronic stress and family situations. I was a single parent of 3 young children. My ex-husband was an alcoholic, so there was lots of sort of like letting down and things, and there was only me to sort of like look after them. And when we were childhood sweethearts, we'd been together like 20 years. And like when I married for life. Didn't ever imagine that I'd ever sort of be divorced. And for the first 6 months after I sort of got divorced, it blew my life apart. And I went for counselling. And I can remember it now vividly, even though it's like 20 odd years ago. And like the counsellor, he was a man, he must have been in his 70s. And I'd been going for a couple of weeks, and he gave me some straight talking. And he said to me, "You've walked in here and your life was over." And I'm like, "Yeah." And he said, "It's like this." He said, "You've got 2 choices. You've got 3 children. You can either sit in the corner and let the world crumble around you, or you can pick yourself up, dust yourself down, and get on with your life." Now, and in that moment, I thought, that's what I like a challenge. So I'm like, no, he's right. That's what I'm going to do. I thought, I'm never going to be able to rely on their father to provide for them and things. This is all on me. And I'm going to pick myself up and I'm going to dust myself down. And I made the decision there in that moment that I was going to go. So I wasn't working in schools then. So I was quite late coming into sort of like my career, and I thought I'd always wanted to go to university, but I'd met my husband really young and ended up sort of getting married, buying a house and things. And I thought, I'm going to go to university. I'm going to become a teacher, and I'm also going to learn to play the piano because they were the things I'd always wanted to do. And so I went out and I bought a keyboard. I still haven't learned to play the piano, but I did. And it was both the best piece of advice, but also the worst piece of advice I've had as well. I'm very all or nothing. And so I threw myself into this like there was no tomorrow. So I literally went out, threw myself into studying, threw myself into working, alongside. I was working full time. I was studying in the evenings. I had 3 small children to look after. And probably if that's kind of like all that had happened, I may have been okay, but there was no time for looking after myself. And I'm a firm believer now that when I look back, is when we don't take care of ourselves, our bodies will take over and they will make us listen. And what happened to me was I was driving over a mountain and I blacked out when I was driving.
Wow.
And I kind of came to as my car was spinning around in the middle of the road, and I kind of like woke up and was like, it's that kind of thing of like if you're walking through the supermarket and you fall, the first thing you do is get up to see if anybody's watching. And I did. Luckily, there was nothing coming the other way, and I'd almost come to the bottom of the mountain. So I managed to kind of like steer my car up a grass verge and right itself. but had I been minutes earlier, I would have been over the edge. I mean, there's been many cars that have gone over the edge on this mountain. So I drove home, didn't really think too much about it, and my daughter must have sort of been panicked, and she was like, what's just happened to you? And I told her I wasn't injured at all, my car wasn't damaged, but I ended up losing my license for about 6 months, and had brain scans and things to see if they thought perhaps it was epilepsy. But eventually they said it was chronic stress. And my GP said, you've been too strong for too long, basically. So I had just thrown myself into busyness. It helps because I wasn't sitting there dwelling on what had happened. But two things happened. One, I ended up burning out. And two, I ended up as well not dealing with the emotions at all. So I'd sort of pushed all the emotions back down. And probably, if I'm honest, I've probably only dealt with the emotions the last couple of years since I've discovered grief recovery, because I just ignored them all. So that was the key moment. And I thought, okay, this is a wake-up call. And I took it as the wake-up call that it was. I thought, you know, I've got 3 small children. There is no one else to look after them. My mother hadn't long died. My father was end-stage renal failure. So I was a carer for my father as well as on top of all of the other stuff. And I thought, if anything happens to me, there is nobody else to look after my children. So I didn't value myself enough really to look after myself for myself back then. I do now. But I did it because I had 3 children. And went on to Dr. Google, as we all do, looking for that. I don't know how I'm going to help myself. And up popped a local course that was being run on mindfulness. So I went along, and quite simply, it was life-changing. The guy who was actually teaching the course, he was very passionate about bringing mindfulness into schools in Wales. And of course, he learned that I was working in schools. So he was like, why don't you train to teach it to children? So I did. And that's where my sort of like journey started then, in bringing it to other people then.
That's so beautiful. And it's beautiful that through all those challenges, you found, yes, the strength at the beginning to push it to the limit and get to that burnout. But then you also rediscovered a new type of strength to then reinvent your own path and just choose whatever resonates with you and really feels aligned with you. You know, you said that the advice that you received was the best and the worst at the same time. What kind of advice would you give to that version of yourself at that age now, knowing what you know right now?
I think the advice of sort of pick yourself up, dust yourself down, and and those words have resonated with me. And there have been certain times in my life where other things have happened, where I've gone back to that and thinking, right, I've got a choice. I can either sit in the corner or I can sort of get on with things. But alongside advice, but also take care of yourself, not doing it to the exclusion of everything else, but alongside that, taking care of yourself as well. And not ignoring the emotions. If the emotions need to be healed. And so, yes, that was really good advice in some ways, but it's balance, isn't it? It's
Yeah.
not all of one thing or all of another. So I would be telling myself, yes, do that, because you know that is what's got me my career. It's, you know, it's what did help me to move forward, and it's, you know, I've helped an awful lot of people as well from that. And had I not done that, I wouldn't have happened. But value myself and look after my own well-being alongside taking care of everybody else. Definitely.
And if you would describe the idea of self-care, what does that mean to you? Because we hear this, combination of words, self-care, so much online and where we like wherever you look, and in books and everywhere, you hear that you have to take care of yourself. How does that look like for you?
So I actually teach sort of self-care and self-compassion as part of what I bring to people. And it does actually grind on me a little bit when I hear the term self-care, because, you know, when you ask people about self-care, or you hear all of these posts, it's always, me time. And like the word me time is a big issue. I think every second of every day is me time. It's the decisions that you make. It's not just about those physical things, having coffee with a friend, going for a walk. It's about taking care of your mind, taking care of your emotions, taking care of your behaviors, your reactions. It is so much more than just those practical things. And I did have somebody once when I was doing actually a webinar on self-care, and somebody did sort of challenge me, and she actually said to me, this is all very well, but what if I don't value myself enough to take care of myself?
Mm.
I thought that was very interesting. So I did actually follow that up then with we will only do sort of things when we will only change behaviours if we see the reason behind them. And unless we value ourselves and learn that actually we matter, then we're not going to do all the self-care, or we'll start doing them, but we won't maintain them, will we? And I work with a lot of people who support other people. And one of the things, and I've learned this to my cost as well, and I always say to people, I didn't take care of myself and I blacked out when I was driving. So I'm speaking from personal experience here, because often people will sort of like brush it one side and be like, yeah. But people who are passionate about helping other people, whether it's in their career, in their jobs, whether it's voluntary work or whether it's as parent and carers, we can only keep helping other people if we help ourselves first. It is that putting on your own oxygen mask first, isn't it? So it is about, putting our own. And I remember putting a post out once and asking people, I can't remember what the question actually was, but whose sort of well-being comes first, yours or your child's? And it was really interesting because everybody was like 100% my child's. But so I challenged that and said, actually, if you don't look after yourself, you're not going to be able to look after your child's well-being. So even then, to a point, your own well-being comes first. And it's interesting because so many people I see, and especially people who've been through challenging times that have discovered something that they want to bring to the world, will focus on sort of helping other people and then don't help themselves. And that's my sort of passion now, is helping the people that support other people to look after themselves and take care of themselves. But yeah, it's so much more than just those sort of like things, the obvious things that we think of, isn't it?
Mm. Oh, that's a really good question that you asked your audience, or you found. Did you ask you that question about the well-being?
Yes,
Yeah.
yeah,
Okay.
I asked my audience, yeah. I did.
That's really beautiful,
Mm.
because when you are a parent, when you're a mother and you have a child, you really like the society expects
Mhm.
for you to do things in a specific way, and then you have to kind of come back and create your own rules. And also, as your child grows, your child doesn't know what you need, like unless you voice that out. But
Yeah.
how do you voice it out if you don't
Mm.
know yourself? So
Right.
everything is so connected, and it's so beautiful that that person, I know you mentioned she challenged you with her question, but
Mhm.
what a beautiful question as
Yeah,
well, for somebody
yeah.
to be aware of the fact that, hey,
Mm.
actually, I don't value myself
Yeah,
enough. And we hear that so often,
we
right?
do, we do.
Especially through comparison.
Mm.
People are comparing themselves with others as well. What would you say is one of the biggest challenges that people deal with or go through when they find you or they come into your world?
When people come to my world, most people are feeling anxious and stressed and reaching burnout, and they're looking for ways of calming down the nervous system, and they just want to feel better, or they're exhausted and they just want to find energy, but they just don't know where to start. And often it is because they don't value themselves. And what I do get is sort of a lot of people within my world sort of saying things, oh, this friend of mine needs to come into to this world. So I get a lot of like referrals and things of other people that kind of like encourage people to come, or they've seen a difference in this person that's come into sort of my communities, and I run retreat days and things, and think, well, I want that for myself as well. But and it's interesting because people come feeling anxious and feeling stressed, and through the work that I've done, what I've actually learned and what I've actually realized is underneath that anxiety and stress, a lot of people are actually grieving and
Mhm.
don't realize it. That grief is the core, and like anxiety is one of the emotions that we go through when we grieve. And a lot of people don't realize that they're grieving.
Mm. And yeah, I mean, this is such a huge thing, especially uh, thinking about all these past few years, how many people have been through a grieving experience, and maybe they
Mhm.
are still are going through it. What would you say are some of the myths that you hear about? like how to deal with grieving.
Mm. And this is very interesting. And one of the myths was what my counsellor said to me: just get busy, just
Ah,
get busy and distract yourself. Just throw yourself into something else. And people who are burnt out and are feeling exhausted are often caught up in this busyness, and has become their kind of like way of coping, where they're experiencing sort of like uncomfortable emotions, things like sadness, guilt, blame, all of those sorts of things that are really uncomfortable to feel. So rather than sort of taking the steps to process and heal from those emotions, that they throw themselves into other things. And it can be things like, overworking. It can be even things like throwing yourself into exercise and things. Yes, while exercise is really positive, when we do anything to the extreme, it can
yeah.
also have the reverse effect as well. Is what I did, throwing myself into caring for everybody else and not caring about myself. And there are actually 6 myths of grief in the grief recovery course that I teach. Getting
Mhm.
busy is one of them. And we develop these myths and griefs from the things that are said to us by really well-meaning friends, families that we've learned, as we're growing up, from teachers, and especially these days on social media. One of them is grieving alone.
Mm.
And I know this happened to me. I remember when I was grieving after my mother had died, and it was my partner at the time, and I was feeling really, really awful. And just at this day, I just wanted him to know how awful I was feeling. And he said, "Oh, you'll be all right." And I got so angry. I thought, yeah, I know I'll be all right, because I had some of these skills then. But right now, right at this moment, I want you to know how much I'm hurting. But what I did was I took 2 messages from that. One, it's not okay to feel sad. So one of the myths is don't be sad. And the
Mm.
other one was to grieve alone. So it was like, okay, then it's not okay to talk about any of this stuff. Nobody wants to hear it. So I'll just keep it all to myself. And I actually pushed all of my grief back down, and I didn't actually deal with it for 2 or 3 years later.
Yeah.
Um, some of the other ones are replace the loss. So often in pet loss, people will say to you, "Oh, just get another dog." Or how often do we hear when somebody's had a romantic sort of relationship breakdown? Plenty more fish in the sea. Just get yourself back out there and things. And it doesn't, each of our relationships are unique. Just having another dog, just another relationship, it doesn't take away the relationship that you had, that you were grieving for. And in terms of like human relationships, if there are behaviors and reasons why that relationship broke down, we'll just repeat them in other relationships. And you often see people, don't you, sort of like going for the same kind of like types of people and things, and get caught up in this kind of like cycle. Trying to think of the others now offhand. So don't be sad, replace the loss, get busy, grieve alone. And one of the things that I did as well as a parent was be strong and be strong for others. So
Yeah.
because I had children, and back then it was like, well, you don't show your emotions to your children. So it was like, okay, I've got to be strong for myself now to keep going, and I've got to be strong for my children. And I've actually had sort of parents who've come to grief recovery courses who've said they don't cry in front of their children.
Wow.
But actually, the message that children take from that then is that it's not okay to show their emotions. And often children can actually think, well, their parents don't care about,
Mm.
because they're not seeing, and then they don't learn how to sort of effectively express emotions then either, do they? So yeah, so there's quite a few myths of grief. And of course, what happens is when these become a pattern, like they did with me, with distracting myself and getting busy and throw myself into work, any time then that we have uncomfortable emotions, again, we do the same thing. So is there
Mm.
any wonder we end up burning out and things, and isolating ourselves and all of those sorts of things?
Yeah, and I just heard somebody sharing the other day that they were going through something really challenging, very difficult, and they reached out to a person who they know very close to them. And they were just like you said, you wanted to share with your partner what you were going through. This person was trying to share with that on the phone, with that person on the phone, like, hey, this is what I'm dealing with, and this is how I feel. And the person on the other side of the call said, hey, can you please no longer call me with these sad and pessimistic things? When you want to call me again, just call me with something more positive. So, of course, to hear something like that,
Mm,
it's a smack in your face, and
it
it's
is.
so difficult to just navigate through it when
Mm,
you're there. And maybe even if this person is a very strong person in
Mm,
general, but in that moment you're vulnerable. And so every message that comes in is taken personally, right? And so
mm.
how does one deal with this? Like, do you choose who you talk to? Do you choose the moment? Like, how do you deal with something like this?
Yes, and you know, we get to learn, don't we, the people that we can kind of like talk to. And I have heard that said as well. And if we think, you know, people don't say these things to be intentionally cruel, and you know, grief is one of those things that people, and sadness and all the emotions that come through it, that generally people are uncomfortable with talking about, and often we don't know what to say, so we end up saying the wrong things, and we never know where that person is as well, do we? And it could be, you know, that person that's on the receiving end has got things going on themselves, and actually hearing you sort of grief might be like completely overwhelming for them. And you know, it is sort of choosing the people that you speak to, and sometimes we only learn this through actually talking about it.
Yeah.
And you know, when people say unhelpful things, and this is where things like support groups and come into their own, really, because you're in a space then where people want to hear about it, and you know, people want to share their stories, and there is sort of we do get a point when we're grieving as well, where we want to verbalize it, we want to tell people about sort of, you know, what's gone on for us and things. But it's so important that, you know, grief needs to be heard. When it's not heard, it stays in us, but it needs to be heard in a safe, supportive way. And you know, something that often happens as well is when people start, and we can probably all say we've all done these things. I know I have in the past, before I discovered grief recovery, is somebody will be sharing part of their story, and it's so easy to jump in and say, oh yeah, that happened to me, I know exactly how you feel. And it's the worst things that people can say to us. Nobody knows how we feel. The best that they know is how they felt in similar circumstances, but all of those things can really shut you down. So what we do need, and this is what grief recovery gives us, is you need to be heard in a safe, supportive and a non-judgmental space. We don't need to be analysed, we don't need to be criticised, and we don't need to be judged. And it's so common as well, is for somebody to jump in, oh, you just need to go for a walk, oh, you just need to go and do this. And especially if they've discovered something that works for them as well, that they'll say, oh, you know, go and do mindfulness, go and do meditation. And even though I'm a mindfulness teacher, what I always say to people is, find what works for you. Be open-minded, be willing to try different things, and find what it is that's in your toolkit, and build your toolkit up to be what it is that helps you. And you know, one of the things that I really sort of have a bit of an issue with is, especially particularly in men's mental health, there are lots of messages promoted as it's okay to talk. Yes, of course it's okay to talk, and we're encouraging people to, but if you choose the wrong people, it can end up doing more harm than good. If you're having these things sort of like said back to you, it can create all sorts of anxieties, anger, you know, you can feel judged, all of those sorts of things. So it is really, really important that you find the right place for you to be able to talk about these things. You know, support groups, counselling, you know, all of those therapeutic spaces, you know, are massively, massively helpful so that we can really truly be heard and seen.
How can we recognize a truly safe place where we can go, or a person who actually we can trust? Is it enough to ask for proof of certification, or are there any criteria that anyone should keep in mind when they look for a safe space to talk?
Absolutely. You know, that there are certifications. You know, I'm a certified grief recovery specialist, and the grief recovery method has been around for 40 odd years, and it's an evidence-based course. I wouldn't go anywhere that there isn't any certifications. And one of the things that I would certainly be asking is whether the person that's holding that space has their own supervision, as well as they a place for them to go to be supported, so that
Oh,
to make sure that, you know, they are ethically sound, and they have their own space. Because if we are not well as you know, supporters, as facilitators, we are not in the best place then to be able to support other people. And you know, and our own insecurities and things can sort of like filter through and sort of come out, you know. And depending on where you go, you know, if you go for counselling, there are ethical bodies, you know, looking if somebody's got insurance, you know, all of those sorts of things is massively important. And we will all have people in our lives that we know are safe people for us
Mhm.
as well. And even if, you know, if it is you are talking to somebody, even if it's asking somebody if they're comfortable for you to share your story with them, because we will have people in our lives that are safe people for us to talk to as well.
Mhm.
And we can also be that for other people. And in grief recovery, we learn how to do this for each other as well. So in grief recovery, it's called being a heart with yous. And I think this is so beautiful. So you get paired up with somebody and you get to listen to each other's story, and you get to be that sort of like safe person for each other. And it's so beautiful when you find that sort of space to be able to do that for each other.
Oh, these are fantastic things to keep in mind. And thank you so much for sharing because, for someone who maybe is watching our video and is thinking, yes,
Mhm.
I'm going through this, and how can I recognize that it's a safe place or the right person for me to go to? And this is amazing to keep in mind. And also, we will share in the description of this video how you can connect with Laura because she also has a beautiful space where you can come in and really feel heard and understood and seen. So I would definitely encourage you to check out the description of this video. So Laura, I know you talked about grief and grief
Mhm.
recovering. Now, we often hear the term grief attached to an experience when, like, a member of their surroundings or family passed away.
Yes. That's the obvious thing that we all, and sometimes people are aware that the breakdown of a romantic relationship, that they'll go through grief as well, divorce. But what people don't actually realize is there are over 40 situations in life that will cause us feelings of grief or loss. And often that is the biggest light bulb moment when people come to grief recovery, and they're actually and I remember being like this myself when I first came to this. And we have things that are called tangible losses. So they're things that you know have happened and you can put your finger on. So things like being diagnosed with a health condition, becoming a parent, and that's in both for men and women. You know, we often think of postnatal depression for women, but dads go through grief when they become a parent as well. Um, Becoming a carer, you can grieve for the health of the person that you're caring for, but you can also grieve for the loss of life, that life as you know it. Things like recovery from addiction can cause you feelings of grief, grieving for the way that, and like the circles of friends that you had before, friendship breakdown, moving house, changing schools for children. So children grieve as well, and pet loss, baby loss. They are all tangible griefs, and things like changes in financial situations, so either be getting in debt or coming into money. Believe it or not, we can grieve for, because we've been used to having to sort of like struggle and save and things. You often hear of lottery winners that end up losing all the money because they haven't sort of like readjusted to kind of having this new life. You know, lockdown is a prime example of sort of grief. Any situation that has either come to an end or has changed in some way, we will have feelings of grief or loss. But we also have what's called intangible losses. And these are things that you can't quite put your finger on. You know you're just not feeling good, but you're not really sure why. So it can be things like a loss of trust, a loss of safety. So if you've had a situation and an accident or something that's made you feel unsafe, you will grieve then for feeling safe. A loss of identity is
Mm.
a big one, a really big one, which often people wouldn't put down to that's grief or loss. And we can also experience something called a loss of aliveness. So this feeling like empty inside and not just really knowing, just not feeling happy anymore, but you don't know why. And all of that is all sort of connected to grief and loss. And the different stages in life, things like menopause, retirement, all of those kind of like different, leaving home, all of those cause us to experience grief loss. And when we think that there are over 40 situations, is it any wonder that and when people sort of like, they come to grief recovery, they kind of like look at sort of, their life story. And actually, when people sort of look at, what they've gone through, often it's very empowering in the sense of, gosh, no wonder that I'm not feeling great when I've been through all of that. I'm still here, I'm still, but yeah, it can be very, very empowering.
Wow. Thank you. Thank you for sharing this with us, Laura. I really, really appreciate it. As we get to the end of this episode, I would love to invite you to share with us if there is anything you're currently working on, and then any last words of inspiration that you wanted to share with our audience.
Thank you, Stella. Yes, I am working on grief recovery at the moment, trying to get this all out to the world. I think, there's so much that if everybody knew about that, it would kind of like sort of give themselves answers to why they're not feeling great. So I do have a grief recovery course starting at the end of the month on the 29th of April. That's starting, and I've also got, you mentioned the free Facebook group. Grief is a thing that we're not always ready to sort of go down a grief journey of healing, because it is tough stuff. But if anybody's kind of like thinking, yeah, I know that I've got this, but I'm not ready yet, coming over to the free Facebook group, and there's been lots of stuff there to help like build resilience and things. And I think there's one key takeaway is, if you were grieving and you were feeling sad and you have all of these emotions, there is nothing wrong with you. And often people come and think, oh, I'm crazy, I'm this, I'm that. Or grief is not a mental health condition. This was also a light bulb moment for me, that it's not a mental health condition. It is a normal and natural reaction to loss. Even if the situation itself wasn't normal and natural, the way that we react to it and the way that we feel about it is normal and natural for somebody in those circumstances. And, we can feel really stuck in grief, but we can find our way out, is perhaps a key takeaway. We don't have to accept just being stuck there. Learning about grief, this grief education, building resilience, and then taking the steps eventually for grief recovery. And often when people come to grief recovery courses, what they talk about, there is such a thing as grief fatigue that makes people feel heavy and weighed down. And often the results that people get from grief recovery is they say that they just feel lighter and uplifted. And how much easier is it to get to go through life feeling light and uplifted than what it is if you're feeling heavy and weighed down.
Oh, and thank you, Laura, for bringing this beautiful energy into the world and for sharing your gifts with everybody who comes into your space. And thank you for being here with us today. To everyone who's watching us, thank you for watching. Please don't forget to subscribe, to like this video, and to ring the notification bell for future videos that will be posted on this channel. Thank you. See you soon
Thank
again.
you, Stella.
Bye.